It was supposed to be a peaceful funeral. Quiet, respectful, and final. But nothing about that day would ever be forgotten by the people of Hollowbrook. The villagers had gathered in the small stone church at the edge of the woods, where the bell tolled slowly under a gray, weeping sky. Inside the coffin lay Eleanor Hartley, a 24-year-old woman who had died suddenly, found lifeless in her home one cold morning. Her death had been declared natural, though no one knew quite why she'd gone so soon. Her mother wept softly in the front pew, while her fiancé, Thomas Reed, sat frozen beside her, pale and silent. He hadn't spoken much since they'd found her. The ceremony went on, the vicar speaking words of peace and passing. But Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Eleanor's face, as he'd seen it before they closed the lid, hadn't looked peaceful. It had looked frightened. He'd told himself it was imagination, that grief was twisting everything he saw. But as the coffin was lowered into the damp earth and the first handful of soil hit the lid with a hollow thud, a whisper of guilt crept into his chest. Something wasn't right. That night, Hollowbrook was swallowed by fog. The graveyard behind the church was silent, except for the wind whistling through the yew trees. The gravedigger, old Henry, had stayed late to fix the lantern post by the gate. He muttered to himself as he worked, the flame flickering weakly in the mist. He was about to leave when he froze. A faint tap-tap-tap drifted through the air. At first, he thought it was rain, but there were no raindrops. The sound came again, clearer this time. Tap, tap, tap. It came from the ground. From Eleanor Hartley's grave. Henry's heart stopped. He dropped his tools and stumbled closer, lantern shaking in his hand. "Who's there?" he croaked, though he already knew the answer. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then 3 more knocks. Harder, faster, desperate. He ran. The lantern swung wildly as he tore through the fog toward the vicar's cottage. By the time they returned, the vicar, Thomas, and 2 other villagers, the mist had thickened. Henry pointed with a trembling hand toward the grave. "I heard it," he gasped, clear as day. From inside, Thomas stared at the mound of fresh soil. "You're saying she's alive?" "I'm saying I heard knocking." The vicar hesitated, his face pale. "Perhaps we should—" He didn't finish. Thomas didn't wait for permission. He grabbed a spade from the shed and began to dig. The others tried to stop him, but he was wild with fear, clawing at the earth like a madman. Minutes felt like hours. The sound of metal against which split the silence. Then they heard it again, faint but unmistakable. Tap, tap, tap. Everyone froze. "God help us," whispered the vicar. They tore at the remaining soil. When the coffin lid finally appeared, Thomas fell to his knees, sobbing. He fumbled for the crowbar, prying it open with shaking hands. The lid came loose with a creak. Inside was Eleanor. Her eyes were open. Her nails were bloody, the wood above her scratched raw. She stared up at them, chest rising and falling in shallow, terrified gasps. She was alive. The village doctor arrived within minutes. Eleanor was pulled from the coffin, pale as bone and shivering uncontrollably. They carried her to the vicarage, wrapped her in blankets, and tried to make sense of it. She must have been in a state of catalepsy, the doctor said, still trembling. A death-like paralysis. Her heartbeat and breathing must have slowed enough to fool us all. Thomas sat beside her, holding her hand, tears streaming down his face. "You're safe now," he whispered. "It's over." But when Eleanor finally opened her mouth to speak, her voice was weak and cracked. "No," she said, "it's not." Over the next few days, Hollowbrook buzzed with fearful whispers. Some called it a miracle, others called it curse. Eleanor refused to leave the vicarage. She kept the curtains drawn and flinched at every sound. She wouldn't sleep unless someone sat beside her. Thomas tried to comfort her, but she barely looked at him. Her eyes always seemed to focus on something just behind him, as though she saw someone else in the room. One night, he found her sitting upright in bed, staring at the window. Her lips moved soundlessly. "Ellie," he whispered. She turned slowly to face him. "They buried me," she said softly, "but I wasn't alone." Thomas froze. What do you mean? Her hands trembled as she clutched the blanket. When I woke up in the dark, there was someone else there, below me. Thomas shook his head. Ellie, there was no one. Yes, she hissed, eyes wide. I heard them breathing. Under the ground. Under me. Her voice broke into sobs. Thomas tried to calm her, but that night she refused to speak again. 2 nights later, the gravedigger Henry was found dead by the church gate. His face was twisted in terror, eyes wide open, mouth frozen mid-scream. There were deep scratches across his chest, as though he'd tried to claw something off himself. The villagers whispered that he'd been cursed for disturbing the dead. When Thomas told Eleanor, she only stared at him, her lips trembling. He heard it too, she murmured. Now they've taken him. Who, Ellie? He asked, voice breaking. She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and whispered, the ones below. A storm rolled over Hollowbrook that night. Rain lashed the windows as wind howled through the trees. Thomas sat awake by Eleanor's side, holding her hand. Her breathing had grown shallow again, her skin cold. At some point she stirred. Thomas, she whispered, if I stop breathing again, don't bury me. He gripped her hand tighter. I won't. I swear it. She smiled weakly. It's too late for that. Before he could ask what she meant, the candle on the bedside table flickered out. The room plunged into darkness. A sound came from the floor beneath the bed. Slow, hollow, rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. Thomas leapt up, heart pounding. Who's there? No reply, only another series of knocks, this time from the walls, the ceiling, the floorboards. Eleanor began to tremble, whispering, They've found me. The door burst open. A gust of wind swept through, scattering papers, snuffing every candle in the house. Thomas could barely see her in the dark, only her pale face, wide eyes, and trembling lips. And then, all at once, the knocking stopped. A silence heavier than death filled the room. Thomas turned slowly toward the window and froze. A face was pressed against the glass. Pale, rotting, familiar. It was Eleanor, but she was still lying in bed behind him. He spun back around, and the bed was empty. They found Thomas the next morning in the churchyard. He was kneeling before Eleanor's grave, hands bloodied, eyes glassy, murmuring her name over and over. The grave itself had been dug open again, but this time there was no coffin inside, only a hollow, black hole leading deep into the earth. Thomas was taken to a hospital in a state of shock. For days he said nothing, but when he finally spoke, his words chilled everyone who heard them. She's still knocking, he whispered. I hear her every night. A week later, the vicar tried to reseal the grave, but when they lowered a new coffin into the hole, an empty one for peace, they heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. This time, it came from beneath the ground, deeper, fainter, as though there were layers of graves below, each one knocking in turn. The vicar ordered the site sealed and never spoken of again. But some nights, when the fog rolls through Hollowbrook, locals still claim they hear it, a faint, hollow rhythm rising from the earth. Tap, tap, tap. And if you stand too close, they say you can hear a woman's voice, soft and trembling, whispering from the soil. Let me out, please. I wasn't alone down there.